If you're new to our channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.
Now back to the Wisconsin Vegetable Garden Radio Show.
I listen to your show just about every week, and it's very informative.
Well, we greatly appreciate that.
Thank you. With your hosts, Joey and Holly Baird.
Holly, let's go to the IV Organics 3-in-1 Plant Guard hotline and bring in our next guest.
Kevin Espiritu is the founder of Epic Gardening. He founded it in 2013 to help the average person learn how to garden, grow your own food, troubleshoot common garden problems, grow in an urban setting, and more. He does this through social media, YouTube, podcasts, and his website, epicgardening.com.
Welcome to the program, Kevin.
Hey, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you for taking time out of your day to join us and enlighten us a little bit more about the intensity or the challenges one may face with a urban setting such as yours.
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
So we all get into gardening in somehow, some form or fashion. You started it in a very urban setting. How did you get into the garden world, and what was your very first setup like, being in a very restricted urban location?
Sure. So I got into gardening, I guess you could say, late in life. I was 22, I think, and it was just something I did on a whim with my brother. We just wanted to do something outdoors, which is funny because I ended up growing completely indoors. You're talking about my first setup. My first setup was actually a hydroponic system growing cucumbers indoors because I was living in a pretty cramped townhouse that all my outdoor space was facing north. So I really didn't have a lot of sun. And I decided, you know what, let's go ahead and try hydroponic cucumbers as my very first plant.
That's really cool. So I grew up in an urban garden setting in Milwaukee here. What would you say is the biggest challenge people face with urban gardening outdoors?
Outdoors, yeah, I think the biggest challenge is mostly just figuring out how to use your space the right way, because you've got balconies, windowsills, you have some rooftops, you have small patios, and you have to work around a lot of things blocking your access to light, even if you've got a nice south-facing patio. And so, to me, it's figuring out the method to use to grow in your unique space, because you might have a balcony, but it might be facing the wrong way, or there might be a tree blocking it, and you just have to pick the right plants, pick the right method, and then get going. That's, at least for me, what seems to be the most challenging for people.
Now, I want to go back to the hydroponic system you had with your cucumbers. We'll touch on that in a minute here. Were you growing cucumbers that were self-pollinated, or did you have to physically go in and pollinate the flowers in order to get it, since obviously you didn't have insects inside the apartment?
Yeah, fortunately, I grew a self-pollinating cucumber, but I didn't even know that that's what I was doing at the time because I knew so little about plants that I just picked one from the store. And so, fortunately, I lucked out, but yeah, that would have been a pretty sad mistake to make.
Which it can be done. You can't hand-pollinate, but it sure makes it easier when you find a variety that allows or does the job for you.
Yeah, for sure. I think back then I wouldn't have even known that you could have hand-pollinated. So I probably would have just wondered what was going wrong, you know.
Absolutely. So here's a question that we get. How can one deal with getting rid of crabgrass? It's a problem that many of us face, and some people choose to use a chemical application, but a lot of people want to try to find more of a natural means of reduction of the crabgrass. What would you suggest?
Yeah, so I've thought about this a lot. I don't have a lawn anymore, but when I did, the only thing that seems to work, because one crabgrass plant can produce 150,000 seeds. So you have to get it out in late winter, early spring.
Otherwise you got a problem.
Otherwise you're done for, yeah. If you let it get to seed, you're absolutely done. But you got to dig it out, the little clumps, early in spring or late in winter, and it kind of is like a 3-year project because the seeds are viable in the soil for about 3 years. So if you just keep at it and you dig a clump out, you know, a couple clumps a day out or something like that, eventually you'll be clear of it. That's your best non-chemical solution. Other than that, I don't really know what to say, because if you don't get the roots out, you're kind of done for.
And with those chemical applications, with, let's say, the glyphosate, it does kill the roots, but also it will toxify the soil as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're looking to have a more organic or natural approach to your entire space, then I would try to avoid that. You could throw something like corn gluten meal down, which is a suppressant, but you're still going to have to do some digging out.
Okay. Now, we have a dwarf lime tree that we keep indoors year-round. We are reviving it from an attack of scale. What is scale, and what are some good ways to combat it, deal with it, hopefully get rid of it?
So scale is a tricky one because I think it's one of the few pests that sometimes doesn't look like a pest. It could look like a disease because there's just such a variety of species. So the thing that I always do, if it's early and you only have a few, you can use like cotton swabs and rubbing alcohol and just kind of get them off that way with a little hand care. If it's a more serious one, you can actually try washing the whole plant, which can sometimes work. But then there's definitely varieties of scale that are very, very affixed because once the scale, the young scale, just attaches to the part where they're going to be, they never leave. In fact, sometimes they lose their legs and they just adhere, and it's hard to get them off. So it's one of those like armored varieties, lays kind of flat. You almost have to give them a little scrape to get them off, and then from there, you just have to make sure that you're clear of all of them because they can reproduce extremely, extremely quickly. Another thing you could do is you could use like a horticultural soap, or you could use a neem oil and completely smother them. So if you can completely cover, then they can't breathe, and then they'll die that way. But that can be a little tricky to do as well. They're a tough one to deal with.
Yeah, it seems like you almost have them beat, and then they come back. You think, oh, I got it, and then you come back, and they're there again. So yeah, it's a struggle, but a fight that I think we are winning.
I hope so.
Yeah. You are in an urban setting. We've talked about that, and people who follow you on social media will see that you grow in a lot of elevated gardens. Now, was that by choice because there was no other means, because you don't have a yard, or if you had the opportunity to have a yard, would you have grown in the ground?
Yeah, so I think if I had more space, I would definitely grow in the ground, and there's actually a patch in my front yard that I did in-ground potatoes this year. I have an in-ground salsa garden going on right now. I like to showcase as many different methods as possible in my own garden. And so part of what I do is to show that you can do other things, right? Grow in a vertical system or grow in a very tall raised bed or use different types of designs. So yeah, if it was just my garden and I was just at my house doing it myself, I would probably experiment with a lot of in-ground stuff, but I do like to show, okay, you can use this metal raised bed, you can use a vertical stacking system, you can grow in grow bags. A lot of it is to showcase different methods.
And with those elevated garden beds and the raised beds and the grow bags, what is your method of revitalizing the soil each year? Obviously, in a giant raised bed like the Eco Garden system, you're not going to remove all the soil and put new, fresh soil in. So how do you go about revitalizing that soil each year for the new planting season?
Yeah, so what I'll do is typically in the larger raised beds like the Eco Garden system or just my normal 3 foot by 4 foot raised beds, I'll usually just add some of my homemade compost on top, and then I'll get a soil test every year and just make sure that I'm not drastically high or low in anything, because you can definitely over-amend your soil. And then when I'm planting, I'll also do a little amendment in the planting hole depending on the plant. But for the most part, the revitalization comes from that 1/2 inch to 1 inch of compost that I add every time I change out the bed.
Now, you're mixing that in, or you just top dressing?
Yeah, for the most part, I just top dress it, and then I'll apply a little mulch over the top of that.
Okay. So I think no matter where you live, if you have an urban setting or a larger setting, we all deal with aphids, and aphids are basically the tick of the garden world. They do suck the lifeblood out of the plants. What are some of the best ways that you use to deal with aphids?
Yeah, so I try as best as I can to not spray a lot in my garden. I think I've only sprayed once this year, and I used Safer brand soap, which is probably my favorite all-purpose. So that'll help with aphids quite a bit because it has these like potassium salts that kind of dissolve away the tissues of the aphids and just sort of kill them, which is really nice. But with aphids, one thing that you can do is if you catch them early, you can actually just kind of blast them off the plant, because once they're off, they're not like crawling all the way back up usually. So that's what I like to do. I like to just kind of give my plants a little blast with like the fan setting on a hose. That can work pretty well. You could use the Safer brand soap. You could use neem oil. Another thing you could do, a lot of people will say like release lacewings or release ladybugs. I've tried, and it doesn't work that well because they need to have an ecosystem to support them. So if you just release them, usually they'll eat aphids for a little bit and then fly away. So the longer-term solution is to plant a lot of pollinator attractors, and then you'll start to build that bug ecosystem in your garden that as soon as aphids build to a certain critical mass, all the predators will notice and come eat it, which has really worked out for me this year, but that's definitely a longer-term solution.
Yeah, and that's the thing that a lot of people, they hear, oh, I'll buy ladybugs, and then the problem that you addressed, they stay for a while, and then they go find somewhere where they can actually live. They just don't visit your garden. You want them to create a habitat there, which is always a difficult portion because of the size one's garden may be.
Right. Yeah. So if you're an urban gardener, especially if you've got a balcony or a patio at most, then it's really difficult to create a ladybug habitat there. So releasing them is a super short-term solution that you might as well just take some horticultural spray and use that. It's effectively doing the same thing.
And if it gets too out of control, the answer can sometimes be extract the plant and start over.
Yeah. Sometimes if it's too bad, like that happened to some of my kale early this year. I just said, you know what, I guess I'm just going to plant some more kale and restart because this one's got decimated.
Definitely. Sometimes that's just what you got to do. So, Kevin, how do we find out more about you and about your website and all that good information?
Yeah, sure. So everything besides my book is called Epic Gardening. So the website is Epic Gardening. The podcast is every single day. It's 5 to 10 minutes, Epic Gardening podcast. And then on Instagram and YouTube and all those, it's just Epic Gardening. The only thing, like I said, that's different is my book, which is called Field Guide to Urban Gardening. And that can be found on Amazon. That can be found on my store or anywhere books are sold, I think, like Barnes & Noble, all those places.
Well, Kevin, we greatly appreciate you taking time out of your day to join Holly and myself on the program and sharing some of your gardening wisdom with all of us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's fun talking to you guys.
Absolutely. And
for more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.